Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 1st of March 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, of course, Mike Robinson. Well, a little bit chilly here in Plymouth, Mike. Minus 4.5 as I drove in, which, of course, for the West Country is a shock. People in the local shop buying milk, also talking about how outrageous it was of Putin to attack the country in this way.
Yes. But we're going to start off, don't let the weather get you down, Brian, because it is World Book Day. Now, as we know, totalitarian regimes in the past don't like books much, but we're going to celebrate World Book Day. We know that they don't like them in the past because what they tend to do is to burn them. This is a form of censorship, of course. So we have to report a similar form of censorship because the John Wedger interview that you've been pointing people to over the last couple of days, Brian, has been taken down, and the YouTube channel, George the Greek Trucker's YouTube channel, has been closed. The video has been, the account associated with this video has been terminated. We are burning books effectively here, really, because it seems that we don't want, as a nation, as a government, as an establishment, as a media, we don't want any dissenting voices in this regime.
We don't want any dissenting voices, but the government doesn't want to be challenged in any way. The government doesn't want to have to explain its policies. It doesn't want to produce evidence. So I think there's a number of issues under the surface here, and we'll say also the fact that this is happening, I think, is a very good sign, because it shows that simple people power, people putting out accurate material over the internet, is now frightening the government, and this is the backlash. So we can see them more clearly.
Yeah, it's not just individuals' accounts either. Obviously, Richie Allen's account being taken down recently on YouTube. Other alternative media accounts in the last few days. Alex Jones even having under attack as well. So this is becoming quite a broad problem. If you want to find this interview now, you need to go to BitChute, which is a YouTube alternative, and the URL is at the top there if you want to go and listen to that interview. If you haven't heard it yet, we do suggest you listen to it.
We certainly do. Now, I'm going to attempt in the short time available to take people through what's been happening in the John Wedger case. It's clearly hotting up, and yesterday afternoon I took some extraordinary calls from media people responding from the establishment about John Wedger case. This was the original Three Counties radio screenshot that was taken down, but Andy Collins was the main interviewer for John Wedger. And let's remember that police whistleblower John Wedger also had alongside him in that interview former police lady Maggie Oliver. And one of the key things that comes forward is she's saying, yes, the bullying, the threats, the intimidation that John has suffered, I've suffered as well. This is the pattern. So when not one, but when two, and we know there are a lot more police officers come forward talking about what is really happening, the fraud, the corruption, the lies, the intimidation, the covering up of child abuse, what do we see the state do? Well, it starts to censor people reporting this information. Now, key to the report for me was this gentleman, Mike Penning, former policing minister, and I'm going to say brave enough to stand up alongside John Wedger to be counted. He also joined John on part of a very cold section of the walk from London to Manchester. But this is what he said during the interview. I handed the whole file to the Home Office, that's the John Wedger and the child abuse file, to the Home Office, and it, quote, vanished. There are some strange things happening here. And then he goes on to talk about whistleblowing officers being bullied and warned off. So here we have not just an MP, but the former Minister for Policing puts in a file to the Home Office, which is about John Wedger's case. John Wedger saying that the police covered up the abuse and deaths of children with the help of the establishment, local authorities and charities. And that file disappears. Now, we'd emailed the Home Office asking them questions about this. Yesterday afternoon, they came back unbelievably aggressive. They said that Mike Penning MP gave the report to his Home Office civil servants. The inference here is that because he was policing minister, he's automatically got a role in the Home Office. So the Home Office media spokesperson said that basically he gave the report to his civil servants. So I said, no, Mr. Penning gave the report to the Home Office for action. And then I had to ask, so when Mr. Penning says the report vanished, he was confused as to what he did with his own report. At this point, the media spokesman got quite evasive. He later became, in my opinion, aggressive. But then something was said that was interesting, that the Home Office can't intervene in policing matters. The report went to the IPCC. That's what I think he said to me. So 1 minute this report has vanished. No, that's an MP that's confused. Then the Home Office is saying, well, okay, that report, we can't possibly get involved in a policing matter. It was passed through to the IPCC.
Doesn't the Home Office have responsibility for policing in this country?
Home Office has responsibility for policing, and of course the Home Office, directly under Theresa May as Prime Minister, says that one of its primary goals is to deal with child abuse, except when evidence is put forward where a file vanishes. Quite remarkable. So how did it go on? Well, here we had sent an email to Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary Fire and Rescue Service, and we'd essentially asked some key points. We said, could they please confirm that during their latest inspection they were fully aware of the appalling treatment of Detective Constable Wedger, and that HMIC took on board his evidence as to the abuse of power within the Met, etc. And if HMIC FRS were not aware of Mr. Wedger's testimony, why were they not made aware of this case by the Met? And finally, now being fully appraised of Mr. Wedger's testimony, because I'd sent it to them, what action will Mr. Matt Parr take to address Mr. Wedger's evidence in light of the findings of HMIC FRS's current report? And that was their current report, which was in any case critical of the Met Police. So this is what they came back with. It says, for our National Child Protection Inspection Programme, we follow a set methodology which is the same for all forces. This looks at every stage of contact a child has with the police and includes examining the evidence of children detained in custody. HMIC FRS was aware of John Wedger's testimony due to what was reported in the public domain. However, this case was not considered as part of this inspection, given the specifics of our methodology. Our Metropolitan Police Service Child Protection Inspection Report and subsequent follow-up reviews provide a robust and in-depth analysis of the force's performance, and where improvements are needed, HMIC FRS continues to closely monitor the Met's performance in this case. So they claim that they did a robust investigation by not looking at the evidence.
This is a staggering statement. This is the first time I've seen this statement. So what they're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but what they seem to be saying is that they look at the Met's treatment of children detained in custody, experiences of children detained in custody, and because John Wedger was making allegations of investigations which weren't being carried out, and therefore no children being brought into police custody, no children being interviewed by the police, then that's outside the remit of their investigation. So how are they supposed to inspect the constabulary and find out if the constabulary is doing its job or not if they don't look at allegations of the constabulary not doing its job?
Turn it on its head, Mike, and you get the answer, and that is that by not looking at the evidence, you are not really examining what the police are up to, and that is what your real job is. So These are the words from that organisation themselves. I've put another challenge into them today, because as we get the response from the Home Office, as we get the response from HM Inspectorate of Constabulary, and we're now going to go on to one more, we can see that the evidence is before us.
There's a picture forming.
There's a picture forming. Now, what is that picture? It could be simply of incompetence, that John Wedger's file has been lost. But I think that when you put these very devious and carefully constructed media team reports together, you can start to smell that something is very wrong here. So let's come on to the next one. This is the UK email to the Independent Office for Police Conduct. We talked
sorry, this is the replacement for the IPCC, is
yeah,
that right?
This one is the replacement for the IPCC.
So this is the organisation that the Home Office claims has been the ultimate recipient of John Wedger's file?
Yes, it would appear so, Mike. So we gave them a reminder of the Three Counties radio, then we asked for the boss, Mr. Lockwood, could he confirm that IOPC did indeed make the statement? There's no evidence to back up John Wedger's testimony. Secondly, can he confirm that a significant number of staff left their posts before the investigation was completed? And then thirdly, in the same BBC Three County interview, former Policing Minister Mike Penning MP said he'd handed a file on John Wedger, and I've added, and wider child abuse issues, because that's what I believe is in that report, to senior civil servants in the Home Office, and it's vanished. That being the case, can Mr. Lockwood confirm he was made aware of the content of Mr. Penning's file by the Home Office at the time of IOPC's investigation into the child abuse cover-up allegations? So I wanted to know whether IOPC had that file. Let's have a look at their response. Here we go. They said, "Dear Mr. Gerrish, while you are not a member of the media, I'm replying to you directly rather than forward your query so that it's dealt with quickly. I'm aware that you previously interviewed Mr. Wedger on your YouTube channel. In relation to the points you've raised, I can confirm that we supplied the following statement to BBC Three Counties Radio. The IOPC discontinued an investigation into the actions of Metropolitan Police officers in relation to allegations of conspiracy and cover-up in historical child abuse allegations made by a serving Metropolitan Police officer. The investigation found a lack of evidence to support the allegations. 2. Only one member of IOPC left the investigation handling Mr. Wedger's case before completion. While staff leaving investigations is never ideal, turnover is natural within a large organisation, and there was a consistent oversight of the investigation by a single staff member throughout. 3, we were aware of a file, but it related to internal disciplinary issues within the Metropolitan Police Service in relation to DC Wedger." So we get an interesting picture here. This file, which had disappeared, they seem to know was just containing disciplinary stuff. How does this work, Mike?
So did they see it or did they not see it?
I don't know. So I had an interesting conversation with them. Let's take you through a summarised version. This was with their media man, David Carnell. I pointed out that the IOPC had used a cheap opening, which is to say to me, you're not a proper journalist, so we don't normally bother with people like you, but on this occasion we're going to give you a reply. I said, how were you aware of a file that had been lost? Mike Penning says the file was lost, so I pointed out to them that they were seemingly aware of a file that had been lost because Detective Constable John Wedger told us about it. So I said, but you don't believe a word John Wedger says because you found there's no evidence to support his allegations. John Wedger told us about the report, but the report came from a former policing minister, Mike Penning MP. Did you see the report? No. Has the Director General Michael Lockwood seen my email? No. I am giving you the answer. Do you think that all media inquiries are seen by senior managers? UK column, will you pass my email to Michael Lockwood? the answer was essentially no. And this man then became really, well, in my opinion, he became hostile. So we now know that when I sent in an email actually saying to the main person, we need some answers here, I get an answer from what is actually quite a junior media person, if you look at this man's background, and he says he is giving me the answer. So now we've got a system of government around policing and child abuse, one of the most critical areas of the Constitution, where the answer doesn't come from the appointed civil service, it comes from some media person who has now assumed responsibility for answering questions.
Why didn't you get a written response?
Well, I did get the email response, but I didn't get a formal response from the man I asked, which was the boss. I went to the boss. So I've now asked that my original email and questions have gone through to that gentleman, and we will see whether they are passed through. But now, of course, the thing to do is to write directly to him in person, recorded delivery. But can I say here, and we'll pop it up this way, did I get a warm feeling that this organisation was deeply concerned that we had police officers talking about the cover-up of child abuse? We've got missing files that have been put together by MPs and submitted to the Home Office. And what I get from this gentleman, I would loosely call a fairly aggressive fob-off. This is dangerous stuff because it means that these organisations are just not functioning properly. If you want to have a look at the individual, you can see him here on LinkedIn. But of course, he's saying that part of his job is providing
handling advice to senior management.
Yeah, and in drafting lines. This word line for me is a newspeak term. It means opaqueness. It means blurring the boundaries, putting out a line. You're not saying it's the truth. You're not saying it's accurate. It's just our line. So there we are, as a result of John Wedger standing up to say that the Metropolitan Police helped cover up the abuse of children, and that was also supported by MPs, local authorities, and some children's charities, despite other police officers supporting what he says. What we've got is confusion amongst the Home Office and policing system. I think it's pretty obvious what's going on.
Right, let's move on to, the weather, but this isn't really about the weather. This is the Telegraph. UK weather. Met Office issues second red alert for snow as Storm Emma hits. Latest news, travel updates and forecast. Well, of course, the new red alert is for Devon. I believe Plymouth isn't quite going to get it, but just north of Plymouth is where the red alert zone begins. But what are they saying here? They're saying unrelenting snow brings parts of Britain's roads and trains to a halt. Another sub-zero day with gale force winds and blizzards. Storm Emma sweeps in from the Atlantic on tail of beast from the east. I'm not clear how it does that, since the beast was coming from the east and the Atlantic storms come in from the west. I'm not quite sure how that comes in on the tail of the beast from the east, but anyway, it's clearly some kind of physics that I wasn't previously aware of. Red extreme weather alert for South Wales and southwest England. London's Paddington Station shut as rail services marred by delays, and National Grid warns UK will not have enough gas to meet demand. So this is what the headlines right across the mainstream media are saying, and I'm saying this is nothing whatever to do with the weather, and this is everything to do with economic collapse in this country. And just to give one example of this, Lincolnshire police today warning that most roads in Lincolnshire are impassable, including A roads. This is a spectacular situation that Britain in the 21st century cannot keep A roads clear. What are they talking about? Some remote villages being totally cut off under 2 feet of snow. Well, let's just remember the photographs from Davos a few weeks ago. That's a bit more than 2 feet of snow. And I've seen photographs circulating on Twitter in the last couple of days, making the point of photographs from the UK, from England, from the 70s and 80s, with this type of level of snowfall in the country. and roads clear. This is a spectacular situation. So apparently, but getting back to the UK, one major road, the A52, is closed between Boston and Skegness all night with not even a snowplow able to get it through. Again, just a reminder, totally cut off under 2 feet of snow. What has this country become? Is it a third world country? This is the reason for it. Local authorities, devolved governments have called a halt to the British economy because, of course, the gritters and the snowplows are off duty. They're not being taken out. Again, I'm going to say it, this has nothing to do with the weather, everything to do with a policy decision not to deploy the snowplows. Why were we able to drive through the snow in much worse conditions in the past? And the media isn't asking the question, where does this leave, for example, emergency services, ambulance access to people? Are people going to die as a result of this?
Well, I think what I need to add to that is some of the newspapers had major articles saying, would people be kind and give help to people sleeping rough, because these are the sort of nighttime temperatures that people could die. But it was only a couple of weeks ago that one of the police forces, I can't remember which it was now, but one of the police forces in UK was saying, well, there aren't really any homeless people. So this is complete breakdown of the country, Mike. We've got local authorities sitting on hundreds of millions of deposits, of reserves, which they don't want to use, but they're not putting out the equipment needed to keep the country going properly.
Absolutely. So, of course, we've got a red alert for Plymouth. This is the threat to life. This is a picture from outside the UK Column office. As you can see, we are buried under tons of snow. There's none to be seen. The roads were clear this morning. There was almost no traffic on the roads. As Eddie and I were coming into the office this morning, instead of taking 40 minutes, it took us about 20 minutes. Schools, all the schools closed. This is the main reason why the roads were clear. Plymouth schools are closed today. Children were sent home yesterday at 11 o'clock because of the snow, as you can see. There isn't any. The National Grid has said, this is of course the operator of Britain's gas pipelines, have said that there's going to be a gas deficit by the end of the day because there's lower than expected supply and an elevated demand because of the weather. They say that there's little prospect of gas actually running out. Well, why? Because they have offered to pay companies, industrial users, to switch off their equipment and switch off their gas demand. So they're paying companies not to be productive. This is a spectacular situation. And they're saying that according to their forecast, there's a shortfall of around 50 million cubic metres. National gas demand today is high, and due to the extreme weather conditions, there have been gas supply losses overnight. At 5:45 a.m. this morning, we issued a gas deficit warning. This is an indication to the market that we'd like more gas to be made available to ensure the safe and reliable operation of National Gas Network. We're in communication with industry partners and are closely monitoring the situation. So we'll just look at what British Gas says about where our gas comes from. Why is there a gas shortfall? It's not clear. And let's just remind ourselves that, of course, the NHS has been warned once again to be prepared for renewed pressures from this current cold snap because the health service simply can't cope. Is this? Are we really?
You don't know what to say anymore,
I just
Mike.
don't know what to say anymore.
Yeah.
We've got a little bit of cold weather, a fraction of that experience in Canada or Eastern Europe or in Russia. So I'm saying this is real physical economic breakdown on a level we haven't seen before in this technological age.
Yeah, and this is able to happen, Mike, because the mainstream media, the BBC, of course, being the worst offender, the mainstream media are simply pushing out this mush of propaganda and so-called news, which is utterly valueless, instead of getting stuck in doing the investigation into where people's taxes are going, why the local authorities haven't got money, or if they have got money, why it's not being used. None of the mainstream press are doing the proper investigative journalism. But as you've seen with the John Wedger case, when it comes down to the likes of UK Column or indeed some of the other alternative media news, when they ask the question, my goodness, things change pretty rapidly. So I'd just add in, Mike, that Plymouth, of course, seems to have got off lightly. Yeah. Thank you. With the snow, some of the surrounding country areas have had quite a bit. There's 4 inches, obviously towards Dartmoor. But where the local councils here in the Plymouth area have got out gritting overnight, even the back roads are pretty clear. So we know that there are people getting out there and doing the job when their facilities are provided for them to do it. When they do the job, it works.
Engineered chaos, as they're saying in the chat box, and a pessimistic view of the economy in this country as well. And we've got to contrast that with Vladimir Putin, who was giving his State of the Nation address this morning. This is the annual address that he gives to the Federal Council and the State Duma. He said, by the end of the next decade, we will try to boost GDP 1.5 times. Our economy has demonstrated its sustainability, and the achieved macroeconomic stability opens up new opportunities for breakthrough and long-term development. So he's talking about development. He's got a vision, an idea for where he wants the economy to go to. We're not seeing this kind of language from the UK. Instead, we're seeing breakdown and breaking up the country. We'll come on to that in a little bit later. He said entrepreneurs should be able to open their businesses extremely quickly. In 4 years, we're planning to export to the world markets more goods than we import. Britain can't say that. Britain has no idea of doing that. Another source of growth, he said, is the development of non-mineral exports. We have to remove all administrative barriers, give as much help as possible to the companies that work in this sector and enter external markets. We have to practically double the volume of non-mineral exports to $250 billion within the next 6 years. He said the increase of economic potential of the country, every region, is a key source of additional resources. We need an economy with the growth rate higher than the world's. It is not a wish, it is a basic condition for the breakthrough in the solution of social infrastructure, defence and other tasks. There's a bit of translation problems there, but nonetheless, we must radically improve the business environment, ensure the highest level of the business preference. I will also point out the key position: the state's share in the economy must be gradually reduced. By the end of the next decade, Russia should join the club of 80+ life expectancy. So he's talking about developing health care for people and bringing up people's standard of living. He's talking about developing a productive economy, not based on hydrocarbons alone. He's talking about a positive view for where the Russian economy goes in the next 20, 50, 100 years. And instead, we're talking about services and shutting down productivity and not dealing with the productivity issues that we've got in this country. It is spectacular. I think we should swap parliaments.
A very interesting statement, Mike. What I'll add to that is that I think we alluded to having a guest here yesterday, a French gentleman full of information about what's been happening in France. Also talking about the close down of a lot of French industrial infrastructure. We're seeing it happen in UK and France simultaneously, while we also have got this linking together of politics and defence. This is planned. The breakdown of British industry manufacturing is planned, and I think in the forthcoming weeks we're going to be able to talk a lot more about how this has been done, certainly who's doing it. One of the areas suffering in UK is housing, of course, and a week or so ago we pointed out that the reports had started talking about the imminent privatisation of UK social housing. Interestingly enough, The Guardian here with quite a measured article saying it doesn't work in Europe, it's not going to work here. The UK government has made clear that it wants to move housing associations, reclassified as public bodies in October, off the public books as soon as possible. It also wants to encourage the building of more new homes for sale rather than for rent. We pointed out that this is a complete scam in order to shift money around, selling off public assets for great profits. But we had a very interesting email come in from gentleman this morning. Let's read it. Dear Mike and Brian, UK column 22nd of February. The privatisation of housing was introduced by Tony Blair in 1997. He called a cabinet meeting and with Gordon Brown announced that the government is getting out of the housing business. Details are sketchy, but it was believed that in order to keep within the EU limit for public sector borrowing requirements.
Yeah, that's the government deficit, in other words.
Yep, to remain eligible to stay in the EU and release money for the new Labour programme, it was necessary to capitalise around 130 billion of assets. Privatising council housing fitted the bill. A single step would have been politically and practically unpalatable. So it was done a bit at a time. Margaret Thatcher brought in the Housing Act that empowered tenants. Tenants were disempowered by infiltrating or neutralising the tenants and residents associations in a policy of control or destroy, which continues in Labour boroughs to this day. The disposal of assets was a gradual process, starting with the creation of housing associations, followed by stock transfer. Of course, there was a massive corruption during this process. Compliant council chiefs were rewarded with gongs and jobs. And all Mrs May is doing now is continuing what Blair started. This, I thought, was a really excellent email, Mike. And if we put up the two pictures of the horrors, Tony Blair and Theresa May, different parties, but absolutely identical agenda has been carried on through. So there is no political party system in UK. That's only the stage show. Behind it, we have got the same policy being driven through. And of course, we can now see where the policy takes us. They are desperate to get us finally locked into the European Union under the lie of Brexit.
Which leads us nicely into this, because who is this? Gavin Williamson meeting Andrea von der Leyen, the German defence minister, yesterday. She was over visiting, Ursula von der Leyen, do apologise. Well, we're working together to stronger defence relationship. Now, we already have a defence relationship with Germany. That was announced last October, November. If you look on the UK column's EU military unification timeline, you can find that. But these two and their teams met to discuss strengthening defence ties. The German defence minister and Gavin Williamson took the opportunity to meet a group of German junior officers who've been learning about UK defence at the Ministry of Defence. So we've got German defence staff working within the Ministry of Defence to learn the ropes. Gavin Williamson said the UK and Germany face the same intensifying threats to our way of life, and we work closely together to protect our citizens from harm. Germany is one of our closest allies, and I look forward to even closer cooperation. The visit follows on apparently from increased cooperation between the two countries. February saw the successful ministerial equipment capability cooperation talks in Berlin and the latest annual UK-Germany Army staff talks, which took place in London. So we're moving ahead as fast as possible, and so is the European Council, because that meets in a few days' time to discuss, well, what's on the agenda. Well, of course, PESCO, the Foreign Affairs Council, is going to start with a discussion of the permanent structured cooperation, and ministers are expected to adopt a decision formally establishing the list of projects to be developed under PESCO. They're expected to adopt a recommendation on an implementation roadmap of PESCO. So this is moving ahead very nicely. They're also going to talk more broadly on security and defence. They're going to exchange views on the implementation of the EU global strategy in the field of security and defence. They're going to focus on CARD, which is the Coordinated Annual Review on Defence, and also on the European Defence Fund, Common Security and Defence Policy partnerships, and the ongoing work on military mobility. They're also going to discuss EU training missions, and they're going to discuss deployments in Central African Republic, Mali and Somalia. And it's also going to be an opportunity, they say, to review the functioning of the military planning and conduct capability, which was established in June 2017. The MPCC oversees EU training missions, and they're also going to discuss EU-NATO cooperation And over lunch, they're going to have an informal discussion with Jens Stoltenberg, who will once again get the opportunity to snuggle up nice and close to Federica Mogherini. But the key point here is, Brian, this is moving on a pace. I'm not clear yet whether this is an EU27 or an EU28 meeting. I'm still trying to find that out. It hasn't been published whether that's the case. But as soon as I find out, I'll pass that along.
What is clear is that massive integration is just carrying on apace while we're getting all of this nonsense about the weather. Absolutely.
So massive integration in defence carrying on apace. But the Times yesterday, we mentioned this story in general, but I wanted to highlight this headline because the Times front page yesterday said, "Don't break up Britain, May warns EU leaders." Theresa May has got to be one of the biggest hypocrites on the face of the earth, because it's not the EU that is breaking up Britain at the minute, it is Theresa May. And this is indicative of that, because this is a blog post for the Constitution Unit of UCL, University College London, and the headline is, Devolution, Brexit and the prospect of a new constitutional settlement for the 4 countries of the UK. All the constitutional focus amongst mainstream constitutional campaigners at the moment is about the breakup and regionalisation of the UK. This particular one is from the Welsh Assembly's Constitutional and Legislative Affairs Committee Chair, Mick Antonou. He's offering his personal view on the government's current approach to Brexit and calls for a constitutional reordering of the UK once Britain leaves the EU. He says leaving the EU has turned out to be more than a mere decision to leave a Europe-wide economic and social bloc, and has brought into sharp focus the future role and status of the UK in the world. What do we represent and how are we perceived? How much influence in the world in world economic and political affairs do we really have? These questions, however, go even deeper in that they also call into question the very purpose, long-term future and stability of the UK as a country. He says whatever the outcome of constitutional battles that are going on at the moment, there also needs to be a recognition and assurance that the UK will modernise its constitutional arrangements. After Brexit, there is no idyllic pre-1972 nirvana to return to. It is clear that the Joint Ministerial Committee has not worked, and he goes on to say in his recently published report, UK Government Post-Brexit, the Welsh Assembly's Constitutional and Legislative Affairs Committee has issued a renewed call for a commitment to begin the process of reform. The recommendations of the committee include a call for the presiding officer of the Assembly, the Welsh Assembly, to establish with other speakers and presiding officers of UK legislatures a speakers conference with the aim of determining how best to develop UK interparliamentary working, particularly as a means of scrutinising the impact of withdrawal from the European Union on the constitutional framework of the UK. So this is basically what he's talking about, the breakup of the Union. This might be happening as a result of Brexit, but it's not happening as a result of what the European Union is doing. It's happening as a result of what this government, and not just this government, but the previous 2 or 3 governments as well, have been doing in the areas of constitutional reform. This is something that the UK column has been warning about for quite some time. And honestly, for anybody to be suggesting that constitutional arrangements have to be changed, they first have to understand what the current constitutional arrangements are, and those are historic. And if you don't get those and what they represent, then you don't know what you're throwing away, unless, of course, you do know what you're throwing away and it is your intention to throw it away.
To actually do that.
Yes.
So we can say to people, if you haven't been there before, have a look at the British Constitution Group website, which has got constitutional information on it, and the new Chartist movement, where people are starting to talk about what really needs to be done and how we go about doing it to stop what we certainly see as treason. Well, the other part of that Times front page, you've just covered the May side of it. This was the other article that was there. I'm just going to cover it very quickly. It was simply a failure by the Greater Manchester Police to act in order to deal with organised crime, which was clocking cars to the value of millions of pounds. And it took local trading standards to actually ultimately bring the case to court. So We've got a massive attack on our constitution. We've got civil servants who should be doing their job to investigate dangerous failings within at least the Metropolitan Police. We've got failings in other police forces. That's just put on the front page as though it's a bit of a joke. The Times journalist, not getting into what's being done about it, is simply posted to say to people, well, don't worry, your police force isn't going to tackle major organised crime. It isn't looking at treason. Don't worry about that. You just worry your little heads about how many snowmen you can build. It's becoming very obvious what's going on. But I also bring in this one just to show The Guardian here. Very interesting, this, because we're back on the conspiracy theories and alternative media. But here something interesting is happening, because The Guardian is having to write an article admitting that they've got a problem, because the more material gets taken off the internet, the more people are starting to focus on where it's gone. But what is the main thrust of this article? I'll just read you the second paragraph here with an eye on the clock. You're motivated to attack information that is not consistent with your beliefs. This is just a human trait, said Colleen Sifiat, a University of Michigan psychology professor, adding that when pro-gun conspiracy videos are suddenly removed, viewers can become further entrenched in their belief. Absence of information might feed conspiracy arguments because there's no explanation for the disappearance. So we can say to the government, if you don't like the material, let's see your evidence. Let's put your evidence, the government's evidence, in front of the public. Let's have a sensible, rational debate about what's going on. We don't see that, Mike. No. There's only one reason: the government is scared because they're not telling the truth. And so what they have to do is take the material down, is burn the books. But the twist in the Guardian article is that if you believe in the right to carry guns in America, I certainly support that, personally support that state. If you believe in that right, you are automatically a conspiracy theorist. That was the brilliant Guardian twist in the article. Freudian slip there. And we just bring in this one, the Wall Street Journal, pointing out that China's now going to trial linkage of CCTV footage and what is essentially artificial information.
Artificial intelligence?
Yes, that's the right word, yes. Yeah. Thank you. To give predictive policing. So we're into thought crime here. And Mike, you said quite accurately, is it the Chinese that have developed this system, or is this a system developed in UK and the USA, which has now been exported back to the Chinese? Who knows? Now we'll end on more media spin. This is the Daily Mail this time. Exclusive: Spin City actor Richard Kind is concerned that some women tweeting #MeToo and accusing Harvey Weinstein and other predators of sexual assault could be using it for their own aggrandizement and fame. And this was a key bit of the article. In an extraordinary rant, the accomplished stage and screen star spoke of his concern that some actresses may fake sexual allegations in a bid to garner publicity for their own aggrandizement. Now, that's pretty hard hitting, and the picture works well. Let's have a look at what he actually did say. He said that this is going to make a difference, not because of Harvey, because of some of the princesses of this town, the Angelina Jones and Rose McGowans. They became human, they became victims, just like the poor kid. Oh my gosh, it's equalised them. And I think it's pretty great that nobody is immune, no matter how big you are. It's what's happened. It has been happening for decades and decades and decades. It is terrible to say, and I hate the word, but rape victims who are put on trial and who have to testify against somebody, and they wipe the floor with them. They call these women liars, or they say you're exaggerating or you're looking for money. Now we know that happens. Yeah. He doesn't seem to be ranting about the other side. He's actually talking about what happens when victims come forward, just like the child victims that come forward. So here we are, but I will tell you, it's also going to turn the other way, where women who weren't really abused or really didn't get it are looking for fame or saying me too. I hope that doesn't happen, but it could. So it seems to me that the Mail turned the whole tone of what that man is talking about on its head, because initially he's saying, it's great this is coming forward, we're exposing the abuse. These women, when they come forward, are abused again in court. That was the real message. Totally turned on its head. Just astonishing. Well, there we are. We'll end on that note. Do we think we're making some progress? We think huge progress made over the last 6 months, in that the government is so frightened of the truth, it's having to censor the internet, it's having to attack members of the public who've taken it on themselves to push out news and media. A government with billions of pounds, trillions of pounds at its disposal is terrified of one thing: truth coupled with exposure. We can do it, and we say to all of our viewers and listeners, you can do it. Get the facts, get the information, challenge your MPs, challenge your local authorities, challenge these civil servants who think they can hide from the truth. It's just enough people doing what needs to be done. And I'll end with the statement that we understand that the Fresh Start conference, which was due to be this Saturday up in Scotland, is going to be postponed until next weekend as a result of the amount of snow in Scotland, at least, and also the disruption to travel, train flights, etc. So I think that David Scott will be pushing out a press statement on that, but we understand that that is what the plan is. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.